Buenos días, buenas tardes, welcome, bienvenidos. Hopefully I captured all the different time zones that people are participating in. As Norma mentioned, I'm Laura Castillo-Page, and I'm going to serve as your moderator for this session entitled Critical Conversations Regarding Hispanic, Latina, Latino, Latinx Inclusion in Academic Medicine, or should I say LHS+. I've got to get used to this new term that JP introduced. So my pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am a proud New York Puerto Rican, born and raised in New York with parents from both Cuba and Puerto Rico. So proud to represent. So our session objectives, just to remind everyone today, are to share personal anecdotes, as we've been doing throughout the conference, in succeeding in academic medicine, to describe the challenges to Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx inclusion in academic medicine, and to provide examples of successful approaches to enhance Hispanic and Latino, Latinx inclusion in academic medicine. So hopefully we'll be able to cover all of those topics during our session. Just as yesterday, we are hoping for a robust, engaging, and candid dialogue amongst all of us. So on behalf of the panel today, I can tell you that we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in asking their questions and sharing their thoughts and ideas. And so we want everyone to feel that this is a safe space to do so. Así que estamos entre familia here. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, I do want to share a recent experience. A few weeks ago, I was listening to a session, one of my first sessions that I participated in my new job at the National Academies. And the session was covering cultural biases in STEM. And teachers in particular shared a slide entitled Racial Position Model. And there were two factors that were being considered in this model as it pertains to a sense of belonging in STEM fields. And the two factors were culturally foreign and higher status. And so if you can envision this model, at the top right side of the model were white Americans as being considered or as being perceived as the most American, really not foreign, right? And of higher status. But on the lower left-hand side of the model were Latinos, perceived as culturally foreign and of lower status. And it just left me thinking how we are often seen as the perpetual outsiders. And I had the chance to talk to JP about this yesterday because it just really struck a chord with me. And regardless of our history in this country and the significant contributions that we make, we are continuously seen as these perpetual outsiders. And how we are often seen in this limited capacity, right? And not just for our diversity and our resilience. So in this session and throughout this conference, as it has been covered, I hope that we can continue to unpack this further so that we can change this perception that unfortunately we know negatively impacts so many from even considering entering this field in academic medicine. And so that we can continue to advance the inclusion of Latinos, Latinas, Latinx in academic medicine. So with that, I'm going to introduce our distinguished panel. We have four exceptional panelists today joining us. We have Dr. David Hayes Bautista, who you've already heard from this morning, sharing some of his resources, and I know has a new publication, a book as well to share. He is Professor of Public Health and Medicine and Director of the Center for Latino Health and Culture at the School of Medicine at the University of California in Los Angeles. We also have Dr. Fernando Mendoza, Associate Dean of Minority Advising and Programs, Stanford School of Medicine, and Professor Emeritus in Pediatrics at Lucille Salter Packard Children's Hospital. Also have Dr. Eneida Roldan, Chief Executive Officer, FIU Healthcare Network, also Associate Dean for International Affairs and Associate Dean, Masters in Physician Assistant Studies at Florida International University. And of course, Dr. Deborah Silva, tenured full professor from the University of Puerto Rico School of Medicine. So the way we will run this session today is I will start with a few questions to get the conversation started. And then we hope that you will all have an opportunity to post your questions in the chat or to pose your questions, and we can engage in a robust dialogue. And I also, for the panelists, I have your slides. So if at some point you would like for me to share them on your behalf, I can certainly do that for all of you. So the first question to get us understanding our panelists and their unique experiences, we'd like for them to tell us a little bit more about themselves. So could I ask each of you to please briefly share your personal story, what you do and why you do it? And I can call on names, but I'm going to assume we'll have each of you chiming in. So why don't we start with Dr. Roldan, since I'm seeing you, I'm looking at you directly.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Laura, for this invitation and this kind opportunity. And of course, my good friend and great colleague, JP Sanchez. And again, thank you to all the panelists, as well as the planning committee of this wonderful, wonderful two-day seminar. So why do I do what I do? Well, I think I can say it's in my DNA, okay? And it's in my DNA because as a Latina, for my family and my upbringing, education was foremost, of course, family. But, it's the love and the passion for family and family support and network. But it was also the education. Of course, as you know, I'm from Cuba. I arrived from Cuba when I was 2 years old. So therefore, my entire family came to the United States at that time. And my grandfather, I would always hear my grandfather that, they can take away money, they can take away even your country. But what is between here and here, and that is what you learn and your education, it will never be taken from you. So that is basically has always been my goal and my beacon as to, to follow that. So overachiever, I think it's not even well stated. It's actually to continue to reach that goal of how I can become better, how I can break that glass ceiling. And yes, I can tell you that resiliency and perseverance is extremely important. It is not easy, even in Miami, and I'm joining you from Miami. This is our beautiful FIU, Florida International University. And obviously, as you know, being a Cuban in Miami, everyone would say, well, the minority here are really the Anglos, right? And the Cubans are the majority. However, we still live in a world where, as you stated, and you very eloquently opened this panel, we're still considered that minority. So you can imagine a Latina in this world and trying to break the glass ceilings. And of course, I know we're all here talking about academic medicine, but when you read my bio, I have been in other industries, such as business as well. I do have a public health background, but I also I've been in the business world. So how does a Latina, get into those corporations and they listen to her? So the importance is self-awareness. And of course, I know you have my slide. And the first thing is to know thyself. You have to know, and you have to kind of be, I would say, completely locked out of the world, because the world will perceive you as they will perceive you. And if you spend your time and energy to try to change people's way of thinking about you, you're not going to make it. So it is all about who you are and building around who you are. And with that, I always say it's all about your values as well. Those values that were instilled in you, not only from your family, but from those mentors and those sponsors that you've had in your life. So in knowing who you are, you can actually build your business plan. And I'm going to talk about it as in business. You build your business plan with that strategy of where you want to go and how you want to build around it. So that's a little bit about myself. I know that, I'm going to leave it to the other panelists because I know there will be a lot of questions. But in a nutshell, that has been my roadmap and continues to be my roadmap. And one of the things I believe that all Latinos here that we have in this conference, they have a passion for learning and they have a passion to be better, and better gets to best. And that is why we are here, and that's we have gone to where we are. So I look forward to a wonderful conversation, sometimes crucial, but always with a great endpoint, and even better, with a much greater and beautiful vision of a much better future. Thank you for this opportunity.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Dr. Mendoza, would you like to go next?
Sure. Sure. So I grew up in San Jose. My father was a farm worker, then became a truck driver, and went to a segregated school in Southern California. My mother was born in El Paso, American citizen, but was deported when they were deporting Mexicans in the 1930s and she grew up basically in Mexico. I was the oldest of six. And basically what drove me, I think, was the civil rights period of Vietnam, the concern that Latinos were going to war, getting killed, and coming back and not getting any of the privileges that should have provided. So in high school, I decided to become a pediatrician, worked with my way through college and all. And, I think my career has been one of passion for that issue of justice for Latinos and opportunities that come about that just happen. I got into UCSF and Stanford and basically wrote Stanford to send me more information. And they said, we're glad you're coming. And I said, I guess I'll go there. And I've been there for 50 years. I came as affirmative action. We were supposed to not make it through medical school. And yet now I'm a professor emeritus. My career has been being a dean. I was the only minority faculty in 1980s. So the students wanted somebody for a dean. They came to me, and I was a dean since 1983 until last year. So I guess what has driven my career has been that passion, that justice for Latinos. But the other thing I have to say is seeing people like my colleagues that went through school with me as affirmative action, and almost 40 years of seeing Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans that come from these places that you would not think that they could be physicians, but examinably perform in a way that they excel. I had recently a similar an example of that. I came across a colleague who said, do you remember this doctor called Dr. Flowers, an African American? I said, yeah, I kind of remember. He was in one of my programs. He now heads MD Anderson's Cancer Center, right? So to me, the issue as a pediatrician, I feel now, is not whether this is right or wrong. It's the issue, can we use our human capital of this country, which is Latino, right, in a way that we can use their full potential? And I guess that's the part that still drives me, even though I'm retired. For me, the issue is what can I do to help? And I think I take my father's commitment to hard work. He used to work, 10, 12 hours a day, and my mother's compassion for others. And that, I think, has been part of my makeup for a long time and continues to be. So I'm here to help in any way I can. My career has been one of being a clinician, being a researcher in Latino immigrant health, and an administrator, probably longer, being a dean than anybody in the country. But that experience is not going to go away for me. It's going to continue to be something I can contribute to others. Thank you.
Gracias, Dr. Mendoza. Doctora Silva, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. So my story is a bit different because I am from Puerto Rico and I live in Puerto Rico. I've been raised in Puerto Rico. I was not born in Puerto Rico, though. I was born in Mexico. My parents were studying medicine in La Universidad Autónoma de México in Ciudad México. But while I listened to everyone, I learned so much. And I do think that there are many intersections in our upbringing. I was listening to Eneida. I've heard her many times, and I always learn something new. And this time I was going, yes, that's exactly what I was told while growing up. My grandparents had been through the recession here in Puerto Rico. Can you imagine? So they would always say, you can lose everything, but you will never lose what you study, what you know, what you do. So that's how I was raised too, in a very religious, very Christian family. And I did not want to be a doctor. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, a child clinical psychologist, but life interrupted. And I say that not, superficially. It has interrupted a couple of times in my life. And my career is because of one of those interruptions. I'm a pediatrician, I'm a pediatric hospitalist, and I wanted to be a pulmonologist, but I couldn't leave Puerto Rico. I had to stay here. So I decided to, listen to those that were giving me the opportunity to be in academic medicine, telling me, you like teaching, you like clinical skills. How about you stay and teach a course? That's how I started listening to mentors, listening to those opening doors that I didn't even know I could go through them. And I think that was a stepping stone for me. I've been an associate dean for academic affairs, and that's how I started in accreditation, LCME accreditation. And I've always believed that education is the key in Puerto Rico to get better healthcare for my people. And I've been doing that for 20 years here in Puerto Rico. But it was when I started with LCME accreditation that I realized that Puerto Ricans from Puerto Rico are simply not known or acknowledged many times in the States. So the 4 schools are seen as Caribbean schools, not LCME accredited. So our 78 ACGME accredited residency programs are many times in a way ignored, and our students are also. And that opened my mind to seeing, you know what, we're not seen, we're not heard. Sometimes we're not kind of acknowledged because nobody knows that we exist. So we need to open that door. We need to be felt and be heard. And that's what I've been doing through going through site visits. I've been through seven years of site visits in LCME accreditation. And also letting everybody know that our 4 schools, we're just as good. We have been accredited for many, many years. And that was the first inkling of what I wanted to do going forward. And then JP came into my life. And again, that was another big thing in my life. He came into my life and he said, there's something called LMSA. And I know maybe your students are not, maybe needing it, in comillas, right? Because you're all from Puerto Rico and, they're no minorities, right? So he opened another door of what diversity was and what equity was. And within our communities, what is diversity, right? And what we can do to go forward. So now I am involved in medical Spanish, and I am involved in improving the health of the Puerto Ricans, not only here, but in the States. And it's been a journey. I've been learning all through it. I just accepted a position as interim dean for academic affairs of the medical sciences campus, what I guess in the US is called provost. So I'm in a learning mode all through my life. And that's the most important thing I want to put forward. I've had to learn. A door open, a mentor says you can do it. I go, oh, no, I cannot. I don't know how to do this, right? And somebody says, sit down, study it, do a master's, do a fellowship, do this, just do it, you can. And they have been right. So that's what I want to say. You know what? We have to keep going forward. We have to put ourselves out there. We will not feel always comfortable in some of the positions. And I get a lot of imposter syndrome sometimes, but I deal with it. And I have my mentors and I look at all of you and I say, you know what? I can learn a lot from them. So that's why I'm here. And that has been my career.
Thank you for sharing that and congratulations.
Thank you.
Dr. Hayes Bautista, you're next.
Okay. Well, by the way, Dr. Silva, we need to talk because here in California, our students can't get into the California schools. They have to go out of state. A lot of them wind up trying to go to Mexico. So
they can come here.
Exactly. I was saying they should be coming to Puerto Rico. We need to talk. We should be sending plane loads of highly qualified bilingual students to Puerto Rico. Besides that, I often ask people who think they know about the United States, I ask them, so what is the oldest Western-based city in the United States? And they usually say, oh, maybe Albuquerque or St. Augustine. No, it's San Juan, Puerto Rico. But that's in a foreign country, isn't it? No, that's part of the United States. You guys have the oldest hospital of the United States. Also was in Puerto Rico. I am a researcher. I'm a data guy. And I teach a seminar. It's a doctoral and post-fellowship seminar on theory, method, and data in Latino health research. I love this stuff, but I'm a hardcore researcher. I am an 8th generation American of Mexican origin. I was born in Los Angeles, but raised in a little tiny town 50 miles north of Sacramento. And one of the first things I remembered being asked, particularly when we would leave East LA, is, "What are you?" And I was always considered too Mexican ever to be American, even though my family's been here for 300 years. Then, when I would travel to Mexico and Latin America, I was too American to be Mexican. Oh, you speak Portuguese, you don't speak good Spanish, blah, blah, blah. You know how that goes. So here's just what I call the Latino double imposter syndrome. And it's something we build into our leadership. I think we've almost all experienced. And actually, that is the rocket fuel for research greatness, figuring that out because it gives you unique insights into the world. I was trained originally as an engineer. I started off at UC Davis, did my first 2 years there. And that's where I learned data skills. I did my first computer program actually on an analog computer. Then for fun, we got to switch to digitals, and I learned Fortran, that original human machine language. I just love that sort of stuff, but I got tired of being the only Latino on that small campus. I heard there were 25 Chicanos at Berkeley. I checked it out. I transferred. There were 25 of us. Wow. On a campus of 35,000. And 3 of us 50 years later wrote a book about that experience. I'll show you the cover in just a little bit. Of course, I jumped into the Chicano movement, and I wound up being the founding director of La Clínica de la Raza in Oakland. Now, I'm an engineer, so I know about doing projects and data. So the first question I asked was, so how many Latinos are there? Well, nobody knew because we weren't counted in the sentence. So what are their healthcare needs? Well, nobody knew because we weren't on the forms. Well, as an engineer, I'm thinking, this is stupid. Like if you're going to build a building, you want to know, first of all, what's the subsoil like, do the testing, do the foundation. Luckily, the needs were so many that whatever we did, we met a need. But I was not satisfied with just doing this al azar, you know? So I went to UCSF and I studied the basic sciences. And that's where I really came to understand that the questions they were asking about, the theoretical models they were using were not adequate. They always use either the assimilating immigrant model. Well, after 500 years, how much more assimilated do Puerto Ricans need to be? Hello. Or we're the urban underclass, and that doesn't fit either. I also do, by the way, the Latino GDP. We're going to be releasing the new one on September 29th. The 61 million Latinos in the United States have produced the world's 8th largest economy. You know, what urban underclass? Okay. We're bigger than Brazil, bigger than Mexico, bigger than Russia. We're bigger than them all. We're big dog. So I wanted to answer these questions because how can people talk about Latino health? We don't have data, we don't have models. So that's what I've been doing ever since. And I wrote my first book in 1980, started writing in 1982. It was published by Stanford, by the way, Fernando, in which I projected that by 2030, California would be 42% Latino, or we're 40%. I've hit every decennial census right on the nose. Then the question is, so what does that mean? And that's when I discovered the Latino epidemiological paradox. And none of the models that you are taught can explain that. None of it can predict it. And if a model cannot have predictive power, it is a pretty bad model. It is very bad, but we continue to use them. It's the only one that we know, so we continue to use it. So my doctoral seminar is built around 3 questions that I don't know the answer to, but that's why I'm a researcher. First is, what are the mechanisms that drive the Latino epidemiological paradox? And by the way, we see it all around the country. There is a Latino epidemiological norm that's different from anyone else. Basically, we vary around one another. We're not like anybody else. That's the first question. What drives it? It's not income, it's not education, it's not access to care. What? And I'm a numbers guy. Until I can put a number to it, I don't have an answer. Secondly, then how does the Latino epidemiological paradox fit into health policy, particularly with the Affordable Care Act and patient-centered care and all your HCAP scoring and everything else? And then finally, the big question, the big one. So from a scientific perspective, what exactly is Latino? Oh, that's a biggie. That's what way I handle that in the AJPH paper that Seda put in the chat box. And it's, you know, people have all sorts of different answers, et cetera. And yet the health outcomes are not at all randomly distributed. For almost 40 years, we've seen the same much lower mortality, infant mortality, low birth weight, lower smoking, lower drinking, lower drug use, longer life expectancy for about 40 years. So there's something there. This is not random distribution. But what is Latino if we're going to do research? And in the paper, I propose let's move away from the idea that it's scientific in the way that the periodic table is, that here's Latino, here's white, here's black. We're not the elements. It maybe has to do with racial narratives. And we have our own subaltern racial narrative about being Latino. So from my perspective, and I teach leadership seminars on this for the School of Business, the Latino Leadership Executive Training Sessions, I point out very quickly, there are 61 million Latinos in the United States. There are 61 million different ways to be Latino. And no two Latinos are Latino in exactly the same way, right? Look at us here. Each one of us is different. We're all Latino somehow. Or each one of us doing it differently. Look at your siblings, your parents. You all do it a little bit differently, but there's something there. So that's what we're looking at. And what I will be talking about a little bit later is actually capturing all of this for researchers, because I'm very much working on the issue of epistemology and quality of data. If the theoretical models cannot predict outcomes, they're horrible models, we shouldn't be using them. What are the theoretical models that we need, and what are the data that we need to collect to actually do it? I am not at all a fan of this community-based participatory research, because in that the researchers already select the theoretical models they're going to use. They've already selected the questions they're going to ask. Then they ask some people, they give them $20 target cards, give me some comments, and they go ahead and do their research anyway. I'm into the epistemology of research on Latino health. That's what I've been doing.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wonderful. So my next question is, given the lack of Latinos and the inclusion challenges in academic medicine and other STEM fields, can each of you discuss any career advancement challenges and how you overcame them? And we'll start with you, Dr. Roldan.
You know, it's thank you, Laura, for that question. And I think that following David and Dr. Hayes Bautista is going to be very interesting, because it's all about evidence-based, right? I mean,
absolutely.
When you can't, when you can't beat them, you beat them with data, and you beat them with the fact of metrics and outcomes. And, because that, they can argue, anyone can argue. But when it's in black and white, it's a little bit, it's a little bit less defensible on their end. But what does that mean in real life? Well, it means that, that resiliency and that perseverance definitely needs to have, it's the backbone. I have been interviewed with different, at different levels, hospital systems, et cetera. Those of you that know me, I was a past presidency of Jackson Health, and after I decided to leave, I was being tapped by Tufts, and I was being tapped by Parkland and other health systems that were in trouble, because that's exactly what I did. It's the turnaround of Jackson, starting it. And the first, it was interesting that questions such as, you being a woman, well, what does that mean? What are, the challenges, and, don't you have to, don't you have to work harder? And I said, well, work doesn't bother me, and I'm not fearful of work. And so it doesn't come easy. And I would say to all those Latinas and Latinos out there, we do have to prove ourselves. And the way that you do it is going back to what David said. This is through evidence-based. These are my metrics. These are my outcomes. And they're tangible. Where others can actually speak to it, the Latinos can touch it. And I think that has been my formula.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Mendoza, would you mind going next?
Yes, can you share the slides? Can we just tag base our data? As David has always told me from the 1970s that we've been together. So let me just show you why I think the data is overwhelming to say Latinos are going to be a significant part of this country, that every medical school, everything that deals with health needs to address. This is data that shows that actually in 2020, half of all the kids were minority, and probably in 2050, half of the population will be minority. And you can see up there the proportion of that. The greatest proportion will be Latino. But yet also 1 in 4 children currently live in an immigrant family where one parent is born outside the US. That will rise to 1 in 3. Next slide. So this is probably the most impactful. If you look at probably 2050 in your careers, there will be equal numbers of Latino children as white children. And the proportion is noted there. Equal numbers. So this will be a country of Latinos, and that won't change by anybody's policy or anything else. Next. Now, the problem we had, I've been a dean since 1981, 83, and I looked at the numbers of minority graduates coming from medical schools. And you see the bottom lines there are Latino, African American, Native American. The only one that really has increased is Asian American. Now, the problem with this is that while it's been very flat, the population increase of Latinos has not. And that has grown. We were a minority population in 1980 is about 19%. We're now 33%. If you look at the population equity that represents, in 1980, we had population equity of 46%. 100% would be equal equity of physicians. Currently, if you go back to that other slide, currently what we have is actually something lower. We've gone from 46% to 35%. We're going in the wrong direction. Next slide. And what to me makes this really difficult is I think that we have limited leadership in medical schools to make a change. This is the data that I got from AAMC from 1971 to 2017, the number of faculty. Now, when I joined in 1981, Stanford faculty, there was 0.2% Mexican American faculty. When I retired, there's 0.4%.
Double, yes.
I can send these slides. Well, we can send these slides out. But what you can see is that each of the groups has not really increased. That contradicts the issue that we just saw with population. Next slide. So what I would say from 50 years of being a dean at Stanford, being affirmative action student who wasn't supposed to make it, to being a retired professor, is I think that we need to improve the pipeline. And how do we do that? We don't listen to the professors in the medical schools. We go out and listen. What are the issues that our students, that our community has? The great majority of our Latino students are in community colleges in California. We need to get out to that. The second thing is, the nation's demographic is not going to change. It's going to continue. So basic science, clinical science, education need to adapt. So you all are real true assets for every medical school, because you could have every medical school connect with this demographic change. In Santa Clara County, where Stanford is, California is the most diverse state in the nation. Santa Clara County is the most diverse county, 150 languages. Latinos are the primary ones. So we need to play a role in how we collect subjects for basic science, how we do clinical care to that population. But most importantly, since many of you are educators, how do we educate? We cannot train the next generation of physicians without them understanding who they're going to take care of, who are they going to be healers for. And lastly, I think the issue about leadership. Leadership needs to break from the ivory tower to the community. Very few people do that. You all can do that. Peer, helping each other. And the last thing, I think, unfortunately, being a dean for a long time, I see that everybody does diversity, inclusion, equity, but we all do it separately. And something like this is really very important to getting actually more momentum and more success. So at the end of the day, we need to work together. Let me stop there.
Now, thank you, Fernando, for that comprehensive overview of the data. I completely agree with that last point and how we need to work together. So it's wonderful that we're all getting together now. Dr. Silva, I'd like to turn it to you now to share.
Well, for me, one of the leadership challenges has been actually when I go to LCME site visits. I've been to 6 in the last 7 years. The year of our site visit, I obviously did not go to any other. I'm always the only Latina there, right? Or Latin, period. Sometimes the only female and Latin. So every time I go to a site visit, there's 2 things that happen. The first is that it takes a while for the team members to accept my knowledge. And you can see, I was reading what JP sent this morning to the speakers of the guidelines, and it struck me as so important, the nonverbal, the importance of nonverbal communication. So you might ask me, how do you know they were skeptical? Because I have eyes and I can see the nonverbal communication, that they're sitting there many times, and they're very good people. They're academics as we are. But I know they're expecting someone else, right? Someone else. When I sit there in that first meeting, most of the time the chairs are white, older than me, and there I'm sitting speaking their language. And usually what I get are the curricular management and assessment standards. They're probably the most important standards for the medical schools after the finance one. So I am questioned twice, and it always happens, always. It doesn't matter when, where, how. It's been 7 years. It doesn't matter. So I think that, and then after we go to the school, and the same thing happens all over again. We start with deans and leadership. Those are the first 2 meetings. And there I am sitting and knowing the nonverbal skepticism. And that is okay. First thing I've learned is that I need to prove myself, and that is okay. I am not only Latina, I am a Latina from Puerto Rico. I speak Spanish. English is my definitely second language. Si me preguntan a mí, yo preferiría estar hablando español todo el día. Me siento muchísimo más cómoda. Posiblemente voy a poder hacer un mejor trabajo. So what have I done? Being constant is very important. Being constant, being direct, projecting yourself. Sometimes you do need to fake it until you make it. I will go back to the point that's in the literature, the imposter syndrome. Our medical students feel it a lot in the US, and we need to know that is a thing, is real. So even though I know, I learn, I keep studying, I keep participating in the webinars of the LCME, every time I sit down and I see the skepticism, I have to remind myself, you know what you're doing. You've been doing this for 7 years. You've done it in your school. You've done it in other schools. So you have to be very constant, very direct. And that's the evidence. I agree with my colleagues. That is the evidence, being able to perform. And after a while, they know you will perform. So you keep being invited, but you need to be constant and not fight it. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You're there to do a job, and you have to do it well. But you have to understand that when there's skepticism involved, and when you will be looked upon as less, then you need to rise above yourself and understand that this is my opportunity to not only do my job, but to open the door to somebody else, to open the door to others in Puerto Rico. That's my job. To open the door to my students. I want them to be able to accept my medical students from Puerto Rico after I'm there. So I always keep that in mind. And being constant and studying a lot, that has been the way I've worked with that challenge.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It just makes me think that I think we need to be prepared that while other groups may only need to prove themselves once or twice, it seems like it's an ongoing issue for us where we have to be constantly proving why we're there and that what we're saying they should listen to, right? So it's an ongoing challenge. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Hayes Bautista, you're next.
I'd like to make a comment. Yeah, I'd like to make a comment about that, because going back to the questions that I have been asked, right, of, how you as a woman, as a Latina, which it doesn't really make, it should say you as a human being, right? But that's how they do it, right? And I basically respond that in working harder, it makes me better. and that I look at it as an opportunity to grow and be better. Because in the eyes of those that don't have blind spots or don't have biases, that's what they look at. And so I think I become more competitive. But one thing I wanted to say, and by the way, Fernando had great statistics there. As you know, I wear the business hat as well. And it is happening in the business world as well. You know, it is now a mandate. And I ask myself, why should they be a mandate? When, David, going back to the statistics, the numbers are there. Our world is changing. Our environment is changing. Our statistics are changing. Why should there be a mandate that now they need Latinas or Latinos on boards? Because they understand the customer better, because it is the customer, those numbers that are growing. So I think it's not only across academic medicine, and I know this is focused on academic medicine, but it's also happening in other disciplines as well.
Okay. So you asked, what's the biggest challenge I faced as a academic medical researcher? Is epistemological ignorance. Because I say things that people aren't taught. Like when I said 40 years ago, Latinos are going to be 40% of California by 2030. That'll never happen. How can it possibly, blah, 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 blah. To this current paper that just came out. But because I'm a data guy, and I really believe in high quality data, I feel very confident about what I'm saying. So when I get a reviewer back who doesn't understand what I'm saying, well, what do you mean Latinos have less mortality? That's not what I've heard. I always push back and I use the science. I tell reviewers, and I push back on reviewers. I tell them, look, first of all, you need to understand your job is to determine, do the conclusions I give, are they supported by the data? If they're not, then fine, don't publish. If my conclusions are supported by the data, and these are good quality data, and I'll share my data set with you, you have to publish this paper, period. And I've had to do that with almost every single manuscript. And I've written, I don't know, about 80, 90 peer-reviewed papers, 4 peer-reviewed books, and every single one of them has been a knockdown, drag-out fight with the editors and with the reviewers. But because I do data, and I just asked, we're researchers, right? We're scientists. Let's just do that again. Data, conclusion, are they sustained? And if it's not sustained, can you tell me where the problem is and I will fix it? So this is an epistemological issue. Now, part of coming from an engineering background is I studied a lot of physics. And I remember you all took Newtonian physics, right? F equals ma. But then we kept going into Einsteinian physics, and then we got to particle physics. And that was the fun stuff. And Werner Heisenberg, the creator of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, said something really important that I use every single day. And I will pull out, in fact, I pulled out his quote and used it at a meeting on historical Figueroa Street in LA yesterday to understand why it's important. What we observe, he said, is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. And in fact, race ethnicity is a prime example. Again, as my paper shows, depends on the assumptions you bring in. And of course, when it comes to ethnicity, this country has a whole host of them that go back 200 years about what is race, what is ethnicity, what is it supposed to do, and they're never questioned. So of course, they try to fit us into their racial models, and we don't fit. One of the problems I've seen is that if we just increase the numbers of people in science, academic, medical research, but they're still taught the same models by their senior faculty that don't have predictive power, that's still based on these old dominant racial assumptions, that's not any change. And every year, I have 1 or 2 doctoral students about ready to start their dissertation coming to me in tears, being told by their committee they can't do their research, and it's usually on Latino something. Why? Oh, there's no literature on it, nobody knows it, it's not a real issue, it's not important. And that's what they want to do. And I get young faculty, both medical and general academic. I'll get 1 or 2 a year coming into my office in tears because they're being told, unless you study this and it's not Latino, you're not going to get tenure. They're getting no support. And they don't have, at that point, yet an alternative scientific response or a research-based response to all of that. So that's why I set up the seminar. Besides doctoral students and postdoctorals and fellows, We also get some young faculty, and we also get, I call the mid-career faculty, the ones that didn't do a fellowship because they wanted to get out and serve the community. But after about 20 years, they've seen so much stuff. They want to say something, but you got to be published to say it. Fine, we got a program for you. We'll help you say it. And there's also the issue of leadership, of Latino leadership. And I've been the faculty director of the Latino Leadership Executive Training Institute for the Anderson Graduate School of Management. So I know a lot about Latino leaders in all sorts of industries, high tech, entertainment, medicine, construction, you name it. I work with, and I see the same issues. And it goes back to that Latino double imposter syndrome, and using that because you will see things that no one else has ever seen. COVID was a prime example of the lack of Latino presence in the C-suite rooms in the health and medical care industry across the country. We're looking at Los Angeles County. So that people making decisions, what do we do about COVID? Oh, unplug your laptop, go home, take your kids out of school, don't open the doors, order everything by Uber Eats or something else, just protect yourself. We didn't have sufficient Latino presence in those C-suite rooms making those decisions to say, well, maybe that's great if you live in Beverly Hills. What if you're a farm working family in Oxnard? You can't walk off the job and grow strawberries at home. You have to be out there working with your cuadrillas. You have to interface with the clients. If you're in construction, if you're a mechanic, if you're in patient care, all these other sorts of things. So we actually did an analysis, and we're writing up a paper even as we speak. There's very, very practically nil Latino presence. As we look at the C-suite positions in the healthcare industry in Los Angeles County, 7.5% of them are held by Latinos. And this is C-suite: chief executive officer, chief marketing officer, chief medical officer, chief financial officer, the ones who move the industries and their public sector equivalents. So what we have to do, we're actually teaming up with LA County Medical Association. We're going to do two things. First of all, we're going to focus on the incumbents already in those offices. We need to make them more effective. So we're creating a leadership development program, Latino leadership development program, so they can be more effective. So they also understand the research basis, so they can go in and challenge the decision being made from an evidence-based. And we also, the second objective is, because there aren't a lot of old Latino physicians, because there have been so few, at least in California, most of the Latino physicians are kind of young. So we want to start building a backbench, but trained in leadership with a special emphasis on leadership and Latino health profiles. So we're going to actually be doing something about that, building that bench. If we're not going to double or triple our numbers, at least we can be 2 to 3 times more effective. That's our goal.
Can I just add a quick, the issue that David brings is the issue, what models are we going to use for health? The model that the CDC and the World Health Organization has come up with is this comprehensive model where 60% are social determinants. And that model now is becoming more and more distributed in medical schools. Kaiser takes up that model very well. In order for us to do this, if the population is moving towards primarily Latino, the issue is, how do we understand social determinants? How do we rephrase that situation? How do we teach about it, do research, do clinical care? This is where you are so important, because as David points out, people don't know what to do with that with Latinos. Latinos have the highest lifespan of any group, even though they have the highest poverty, lack of access, et cetera. So the future right now, I think in medicine, is to adapt this model that CDC and World Health has of the comprehensiveness and the importance of social determinants. So this is where I think those that are educators need to find how to teach about that. Those that are researchers, as David points out, needs to come up with better models. And even in basic science, how do we understand the basic science of race, whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. Those are really the important questions. And if somebody has reviewed papers a lot, those are the questions I want to be able to read about and review papers and publish them, because those are the things medicine needs right now.
Laura, can I show my book cover, by the way?
Yeah, but let me
Fernando's in this book.
let me give JP, I'll pull it up and
Okay.
I'll give JP a chance because he has his hand up, but I'll pull
Okay.
it up.
I really appreciate the discussion. So, I mean, all of you have been incredible mentors and advisors and are bringing up excellent points. I serve as the highest ranking Latino within the School of Medicine at the University of New Mexico. And so in a state that's 50% Latino, out of 8 senior officials, I am the only Latino. And the reality is New Mexico has been predominantly Latino for a long time. We've never had a Latino dean of the School of Medicine. We are looking for a dean of the medical school. And I think you all know that I've implored and encouraged all of you to apply or consider applying. But the invisibility is not only evident within my institution, but across this country. My greater fear is it's not only that we're not at the table, it's the fact that in the current discourse around race, because Hispanic is not a race, we don't even come up in discussion. I have to explicitly say, Hispanic is not a race. What is going on regarding COVID cases, hospitalizations, and mortality for our community? Always. And so I really want to ask everyone, as we have discussions around race, which is critical, right? That is in the fabric of America. We also have to acknowledge that we are a part of America and force people and bring it up all the time. As we're talking about race, we need to talk about Hispanic Latino identity and remind people until we do become, if we do, a racial category, that has to be explicitly in the discussion. Otherwise, and per the CDC stats, our community will prematurely die of a variety, right? So just wanted
Thank you,
to share that.
JP. I see some raised hands and we're going to get to
Okay.
questions
I just
now.
want to
Let
get
me
to the book
quickly
cover.
pull up the slides. Yes.
Okay.